All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland, and our guest tonight is Terry Lovelace, author of Incident at Devil's Den. Great title. True story by Terry Lovelace. You are going to be a speaker at Contact in the Desert, which I'm pretty jealous of. I, like everybody else, have not gotten out of the house in the past year nearly enough. And normally I'm jealous and I want to go, but this year all the more so. Now you have a wild story to tell us. I'm not sure if story is the right word. It implies maybe fiction, but this isn't fiction. But you have a wild retelling to tell us. But why don't you give us a little background on who you are first? Because, you know, your background is a major factor in why this is coming out now.
Sure. Um, I graduated from high school in 1973 in St. Louis, Missouri, and I joined the United States Air Force right out of high school. I was trained as a medic and an EMT, worked as a first responder, spent all 6 years of my active duty enlistment at Whiteman Air Force Base in Western Missouri. And in 1977, a friend and I went camping at Devil's Den State Park in northwestern Arkansas. But let me continue with my bio real quick. Separated from the military in 1979, I finished a degree in psychology for my undergrad. I went to law school at Western Michigan and practiced law in Lansing and in Grand Ledge for a while, and then got an appointment as Assistant Attorney General to the U.S. territory of American Samoa, which was a great gig. Beautiful people, beautiful place, 2,500 miles south of Hawaii, right in the middle of the Pacific. And finished my career as state's attorney for Vermont and retired in 2012. And my wife and I moved to Dallas, where we're at now with our kids and grandkids.
What is a state's attorney?
They have what's called a board of medical practice that regulates doctors from a legal standpoint to see that their conduct and their treatments are all within the standard of care and within the laws and regulations of the state of Vermont. And if they go outside that, those parameters, and for instance, prescribed Oxycontin to someone in excessive quantities,
Right.
that would make them subject to sanctions under the regulation and a hearing. And then, it could be anything from a hearing or a dismissal, or it could be a revocation of license to practice medicine.
Yeah, so the reason why I have you explain your backstory and who you are is because I think a big leap has been made here in people with experiences because of so much coming, for years this was always pushed back to the crackpots or the whatever. And, for the past couple of years here now, we have people that your General Joe would consider to be a credible person coming out and saying, hey, listen, this happened to me, and it's not just the crackpots. So why don't we back it up, and why don't you start telling us what happened to you? I'm sure Karen and I'll have questions, but
Sure, there's a lot to get into. I should get rolling here. We packed some. We'd never been camping before, right? So we're winging it. And I mean, it ain't rocket science. You pack some stuff and you go down, and we bought a $10 Kmart tent and some inflatable air mattresses. And we went to Devil's Den State Park. And we didn't know it at the time, but Devil's Den State Park has kind of a long and weird history of people dying and disappearing and never being found.
Sorry,
Sometimes being found.
when was this in relation to the bio you just gave? When was that?
June of 1977.
Okay, interesting.
So
Okay.
David Paulides, who wrote the Missing 411 series about people that go missing from state and federal parks,
Right.
his fourth volume in the series is called Missing 411, The Devil is in the Details. And he talks about some of the strange, not mine, but some of the other strange disappearances from Devil's Den.
So it's a hot spot.
It is. I was monitoring the local newspapers down there during 2017 when I was writing the book. And there were two disappearances that year. Well, not disappearances. There was a woman who disappeared and was gone for 7 days. And rangers found her at the bottom of a 100-foot limestone cliff. And she was deceased and ruled by the medical examiner as a suicide. And that's all the details know. That's all that was reported. I would love to have read an autopsy report or some of the backstory, but it wasn't available. And then in August of 2017, a 32-year-old young man from Bartlesville, Oklahoma, named Rodney Letterman and friend were at Devil's Den. They were walking the Butterfield Trail, and they were some distance into their walk. It's an easy trail. It's paved. It's an easy walk. And Rodney realized he was having some difficulty breathing. He had asthma and didn't have his inhaler. Asked his friend to go back to the truck and grab his inhaler. So his friend runs back and is back in 40 minutes. And there's no Rodney Letterman, but his cell phone is laying on the ground. So he knows that the terrain is rough off of the trail and that there's no way that Rodney could have gone very far. And he gets rangers involved. And what follows is, a week-long intensive search with, helicopters with FLIR and all the resources they can muster. And then the search itself lasted with private funding from the family into October. And they never found a single thing from Rodney Letterman until March of 2019, when a young couple was walking down the trail. And in the middle of an 8-foot log, dead center, there was an object. And the young lady says to her friend, "Is that an albino turtle?" And he says, "I don't know what that is." And he walks over and he picks it up. And it was a football-shaped top of Rodney Letterman's skull, verified by the Bartlesville medical examiner, bleached white from the sun. And that's all they've ever found of Rodney Letterman. No, not a stitch of clothing, not another bone, not anything. What I find disturbing is that, to me, from being an ex-district attorney for a while, this sounds like a staged crime scene. It was put there to be seen. And that's what I think is the most disturbing thing about the event.
Right.
So it's a strange place. It has a weird vibe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, man, I got a bunch of questions about that too, but I'm going to stick on you. Okay, so
All right.
what happened to you there while you were a kid?
Okay. We decided we didn't want to stay in a campground because we didn't want people to the right of us, people to the left of us. We'd never been camping before, but we were going to be real outdoorsmen, right? We were going to find a spot of our own.
With your air mattresses.
With our air mattresses, our
Real
$10
outdoors.
Kmart
Right.
cooler full of sandwiches and
Right.
My buddy's backpack. And we got there and, we got to a chain across the road. The road changed from pavement to gravel to ruts in the road. And then a chain across the road with a very sternly worded "keep out, no entrance" sign. And an emblem. And we found out, we didn't realize it at the time. I mean, I was 22, he was 23. And it was actually federal property. I thought it was a nature preserve or something, but it's owned by the Bureau of Land Management. And it's, still no admittance. It's not even part of the park. So I thought we were kind of stuck because of the chain, but my buddy says, no, I got this. He hops out of the passenger side of the car. And what the Rangers had done is just taken the chain, formed a loop, and then put a padlock on it to form a noose and draped it over the opposing post on a nail.
Right.
So, you don't have to fumble with keys. If
Right.
you're in a hurry, just pick it up and drop it and drive in. So that's what we did. Piggy picked it up and it fell, and we thought, woohoo, we're in. And we drove. My friend Toby navigated, and we found this plateau. And I don't know if I sent you guys a picture of it or not, but
Yeah.
it's easily found on Google Earth.
Mhm.
And it is a almost triangular shaped plateau. And there's just a dirt road that went up it back then, and it's still that way today. And somebody clear cuts that with a tractor and a brush hog to keep the growth down. So it's 50 years of burning gas to keep the top of a plateau from
And we don't know
overgrowth.
why. We still don't know why. I assume he
Nobody
passed
knows why.
around. Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, Bureau of Land Management isn't saying anything.
Right.
So the U.S. government isn't saying anything. It's not the kind of information. I don't think a Freedom of Rights Information Act would say anything other than, for conservation purposes.
Right. Okay.
So
I mean,
So,
could that be to prevent wildfire?
yeah, probably.
Production? But yeah.
Maybe. Who knows? Who knows?
Right.
You know, I didn't even
Knows
bother
a
looking.
triangle is perfect for fighting wildfires.
Oh yeah. And you know, the thing should be covered with 40-year-old mature trees by now. And that's what gets me. So, well, we got in and it was a gorgeous place. And we set up our little tent and we made a campfire. And, you know, we had our air mattresses on either side of the campfire. And we're all kicked back in our air mattresses. We had done all the fun stuff you do when you're camping because it was new to us.
Right.
And we're sitting there just chatting, and it's about 9:00 in the evening, and you know we've had a nice day, had a good time, and I noticed that we had trouble with our, you know, being heard by one another because of the crickets, the tree frogs, all the stuff in the forest that makes noise at night. And this sounds cliche, I know, but it's true. All that stuff abruptly stopped. And it really was dead quiet. I mean, we could hear the fire crackle, but that was it.
Right.
And I asked my friend, you know, man, is this normal? You know, like he's going to know, right? And
Right.
He's like, yeah, listen, he says, you know, we've been laughing and cutting up. He said, don't worry about the bugs. The bugs will come back.
Right.
Like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
When this comes up in stories, I always wonder about it because it's obviously the bugs aren't scared. The bugs aren't sitting there going, "Hey, shut up, dude. You know, this thing's happening." So it's like, is it electricity? Is it, you know, pheromone? What is it that would quiet all that, you know?
You know what it is? I think I'm convinced it's influenced by them. I think extraterrestrial beings can influence stuff.
Like a calming influence that basically says like sleep and everything.
Boy, you nailed that one.
Yeah, like those hypnotists that go sleep to people and they fall over.
And they fall over.
Yeah,
I tried that. It doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I don't have a lot of faith in that. I believe in UFOs, but the hypnotist, no way, man.
No.
Yeah, that's how I feel. But yeah, okay, the calming influence, that makes sense. Okay.
Well, yeah, that came in. That we experienced that.
Yeah,
and that was. We're talking, and my friend has his head turned to the left, which would have been toward the west. And he says, "Hey, Terry, were those lights there before?" And I'm like, you know, what are you talking about? Because, I mean, 1977, this place was very, very remote. There are some buildings scattered around it now. But back in 1977, it was the middle of nowhere. And I didn't know of any lights. And his torso was in the way from where I was sitting. So I had to stand up and look over him. And on the horizon, or actually just above the horizon, there were 3 bright little stars in a tight pattern, and they were twinkling, and they just looked out of place. And my friend was an amateur astronomer, right? He could point out galaxies and time when satellites are coming over. That was his thing. He liked space. And I asked him, I said, look, man, you're the expert on this stuff. What are those normal? Are those? And he says, I don't know what those are. But I don't think they belong there. So I said,
the
you know,
terrifying statement.
Well, yeah, kind of. And then I'm trying to reach some kind of logical conclusion. And I said, look, it could be an airplane. I mean, we didn't know any airplane that had that type of light configuration in the front. But I said, you know, it could be an airplane. And its course is, you know, right on the nose headed towards us. So until it deviates a degree or two in its course, we won't see it move. And he's like, okay, well, let's watch it. So we did. So we watched it, and then it didn't move. And then eventually it did after a couple minutes. And what it did was it rotated like it was on an axis. And it turned to the right about 120 degrees and aligned the base of the triangle parallel with the horizon. And as soon as it done that, it started to move up into the sky. And here's where things really get I mean, you know, 2 people see something like this. We should have had some kind of excited dialogue or something, but, you know, our emotions were really muted. Our reactions to this, I think, were inappropriate because I felt as soon as they started to move up, I felt almost sedated. No, not almost. I felt sedated. All that anxiety that I had earlier about the forest going quiet, that was all gone. And I was just relaxed and you know what it was? I felt disassociated. I felt like I was observing this rather than participating in it. It's a weird place. That's the best I know how to describe it. But,
like the potential outcome of the situation wouldn't affect you negatively, like you're watching it happen. Yeah, that's wild.
yeah, you know what it was very much like is I've had contact by people who've had NDE experiences.
Mm.
In the back of incident at Devil's Den, I left an email address and I said, look, if you've had an experience and you want to share it, I'd love to hear your story. And I've had 1,700 people contact me.
Mm.
And I've had a half a dozen NDE people contact me, mostly to say that dissociative feeling, the feeling of being an observer, is what they felt whenever they left their body and went to the ceiling or wherever they were above and looking down. They knew what they were looking at, but they felt dissociated from it, detached from it. And I think that's spot on. That's the way we felt.
And just to clarify from earlier, you're saying that as you're starting to make sense of the craft or whatever it is, it's triangular too.
It is.
So is the area that you're currently camping on.
It sure is.
Like you're in its parking space.
Exactly. I think we were.
Yeah.
Thankfully we didn't camp in the middle of the what I call the meadow. We had parked off to the side. Mm-hmm. So this thing wasn't hanging directly over our heads. And it continued to go up and reached like a ceiling, and I'm guessing maybe 10,000 feet. I got nothing to base that on. It's just an assumption. And it changed orientation. It was kind of on an upward trajectory like this, where we could see 3 lights. And then when it reached the ceiling, it tipped over and leveled off so it was parallel with the horizon. And then the apex, the point of the triangle, was aimed at us. And then we could see 3 lights now in a line. And then it began like a glide plane down. And I could feel this sedated feeling wash over me in waves. And I know my friend is in the same frame of mind. The only thing that I remember him saying was, they're really moving now. I think in reference to the lights. I'm sure in the reference to the lights, but we were sure it was one object. It wasn't 3 objects working in unison. There were just a trillion stars out that night. So the sky was deep blue and the area inside this triangle was jet black. And before helicopter drones, I don't think we would even have the skill of having 3 objects moving in unison anyway at the time in 77. Correct. Yeah.
So it's moving towards you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's getting bigger. It's getting bigger, and the points of light are expanding. They always stay equidistant to one another, and the thing is growing and it's getting bigger. And we should have been concerned, and we weren't in the least. And we watched the thing come in from what looked like at the horizon. When it reached the horizon, it was probably at about 5,000 feet. I don't know the elevation of the plateau that we were on, but it came and it made a stop directly over this meadow, I called it, and it filled that space. It was a city block long on each leg of the triangle. And from where we were on a flat plateau, and we were level with the treetops of the surrounding forest. So that's kind of the geography of it. And as soon as this thing came to a halt, the lights had dimmed somewhat. They weren't so bright anymore. And I still don't know how this thing came down and wasn't seen in 5 counties. I mean, it was big. So I don't understand that. From underneath, directly underneath the thing, it shot a light down to our campsite. And this was a beam of white light that had that quality to it, like a searchlight cuts through fog. You see a column of white light.
Sure.
This was a column of white light, maybe 6 inches in diameter, but there was no fog. It was just the light. And it landed in the middle of our campfire for maybe 60 seconds, maybe less. I don't know. It turned off, just like someone hit a switch. And then immediately afterward, there was a laser-like thing laser-like beam of light, about the diameter of a pencil, bluish purple, that came down and would land at one spot in the campground for a half a second, a millisecond, and then reappear in some other place. I'd seen lasers on TV, but I'd never seen one in real life at this point in 1977. So this thing dances around the campsite. It hits my car.
You're saying like the dot of a laser pointer, kind of.
Exactly.
Like
the beam would come down and stay stationary for really just a millisecond, and then it would just reappear somewhere else. So it would be, I use the term dancing because that's what it looked like. This beam was like dancing all over the campsite. And curiously, it struck me in the chest a couple times. I never felt a thing. We never heard a thing. It's still dead silent. And it struck my friend. It struck our tent, his cooler. He had a backpack next to where he sat. So it struck everything. And I, had the feeling it's pretty obvious this thing's scanning us. It's, it's checking us out.
Right.
But still no anxiety. And that lasted a couple of minutes and then turned off abruptly. And then all of a sudden, that sedated feeling that we felt transitioned to sleepy. And I was suddenly sleepier than I'd ever been in my life. All I wanted to do was get in the tent and go to sleep. I mean, I would have been content to sleep on the air mattress out in the open air, but I felt compelled to get into the tent. And that's what I did. That's what we both did. And I didn't take off my boots, which comes into play, or my shirt. I just fell on top of this air mattress and I was out. And I don't think I was asleep. I think I was unconscious. And that's when they took us. So I don't know how long we were gone because I don't know. I was out. Both of our watches stopped at 2:40, 2:40 a.m. We both had wind-up mechanical watches, which were kind of integral to the job of being an EMT. But we had decent, good watches. Mine stopped at 2:40. My friend's stopped at 2:41, and those watches never worked again. I wish I'd saved mine.
How do you know that you were taken if you were unconscious?
Well, let me finish the story.
Sure.
Okay. Well, first of all, too, I do have some memories. I don't have a clear linear memory of what happened that evening, but I do have bits and pieces. And that's been the subject of nightmares for 44 years now. So not as often now, but, a couple of years when I was working on the book, they ramped up. I'm sure that's just from going through all of the reliving all the stuff all over again to recite it into the book. I took notes in 1977, and I had a notebook filled with details about this because I thought it was important to preserve it because I don't think we have time to go into it tonight, but the OSI, the security, the United States Air Force Security Police, the investigative branch, the Office of Special Investigations.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they knew, but they knew. They knew what we saw. They knew we saw something.
Oh.
Huh.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And that was their concern with us. I think they were afraid that, because I had a reputation as an amateur photographer. I had a little dark room set up in my house. And my friend Toby and I, we both lived on the base. We were both married, so we were in family housing. And, when you live on a base, on a SAC base with nuclear armed B-52s and Minutemen II ICBM missiles, there's not much you can do with a camera. I mean, taking pictures is kind of frowned upon. So
Yeah.
I wanted to get out in the country and take some pictures of wildlife. So that was the object of the exercise. So,
Yeah. What am I going to see that's classified out there?
Yeah, nothing. I can
Just some deer. I'm sure.
Apparently you found the one thing.
Yeah, you stumbled upon the one thing.
Well, we sure did.
Yeah.
And God, I wish I had a 36 exposure roll of film for it. I really do.
Yeah. I was watching an interview with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he was being asked about experiencers, and he basically said, I'm not going to come down on anybody with what they experienced. I don't know, but if it ever happens to you again, steal something.
Yeah.
Was his answer.
Yeah, steal some. It's good
Yes.
advice, but
Yeah.
Steal something from the hyper
Right, totally. I thought it was
Yeah.
you got to be pretty ballsy, but right
pick
on.
their pockets. Sure.
yeah. You're dealing with somebody who's 500 rungs up the evolutionary ladder from where you are, so
Right. Yeah.
it's going to be
Okay,
required.
so at this point you've passed out in the tent and you know you've been taken.
I passed out in the tent and I don't know anything at this point. What I know is that, and I found out later, working time backward, I woke up to these flashing lights that were coming through the canvas of the tent, and they were just incredibly bright. They were bright as camera flashes, like kind of the old school big bulbs they used to use in the 60s that would, you see blue every time you blinked for an hour, a blue dot. They were that bright, and they would light up the inside of that tent for a millisecond. And they were white and yellow and orange. And I wake up and I don't have my wits about me. And I'm thinking, where am I? Oh yeah, we're camping. And I thought, what are these lights? And I thought, well, these must be the overhead flashing lights of a park ranger's truck there to kick us out. So that's the logical conclusion I came to. And then there was a noise where it had been silent before. Now there's this mechanical noise that's it's not so much loud audibly. It's kind of a noise that you almost feel in your chest, like a big bass speaker at a concert. It's that kind of sound.
I'm a bass player. So.
Are you?
Yep.
So
I do.
Yeah. And I thought, a park ranger running a generator in the back of a pickup truck, that doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. And I sat up, and that's when I noticed that my boots had been untied almost all the way down. And I was absolutely certain I did not go to bed with them like that. I went to bed with them laced fully up. And I wasn't afraid, but that annoyed me. And I took off my boots, and my socks were on sideways. Now, in the military, they teach you to take care of your feet. And I would never have done that. Not back then, not today. Mm-hmm. And, but it didn't strike me that, we had been undressed and redressed. So I took off my boots, I put them on properly. I turned my attention to my friend, and he's looking at something outside the flap of the tent. He's on his knees. And in one of these flashes of white light, I could see that he'd been crying because there was a track of tears down the side of his face that fluoresced in this white light. And I could see this white streak in a millisecond flash of white light. And that concerned me because I couldn't imagine what would make this guy cry. And I asked him, I'm like, Toby, man, what is it? Is it park rangers? Who's out there? And he said something like, shh, be quiet. I think they're still out there. And I'm like, who's still out there? And he's non-responsive. And I got to my knees and I looked back. I peeled back the flap of my tent. And this thing that had been 3,000 feet over our heads when we went to bed has descended and is now parked 30 feet over the top of this meadow. And that's why these lights were so bright, was because the points of the triangle were all equipped with what I call a light bar, a bar that ran all the way up and down the depth of the structure. And then there was a beam of light that ran up and down that light bar. There's a drawing of it. If anyone wants to look at it, it's at terrylovelace.com. I made that drawing in 1976 on some notebook paper, and I redrew it a little more carefully on art paper for the book. But that's a very accurate representation of what we saw. And the second thing I saw was what I took to be a dozen, maybe 15 little kids walking around the meadow. I mean, just like bopping around like they were tourists or something. And I asked my friend Toby, I said, man, what are these kids doing out here in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night? And that's when he said, Terry, man, those ain't no little kids. Look at them. They're not human beings. And he said this, he said, don't you remember they took us and they hurt us? And as soon as he said that, my fear level went from about a 2 to 10. And I was absolutely terrified because all I could think of, if we cough or sneeze, we're going to draw their attention. They're going to come over and who knows what happened. And of course, they were long done with us. So, that wasn't really a possibility. They were gray. They were about 3 feet high. They were too far away for me to tell for certain if they were wearing a gray garment or if that was their skin tone. And just very typical spindly torso and long limbs. and they walked
your
with kind of a
classic gray alien, big head. big
classic
eyes.
gray, very much like Close Encounters of the Third Kind was released in November of 1977, 5 months after our experience. And in the last scene, they show some grays kind of coming out of a fog or a mist along the ship, and they look very much like that. There's also a YouTube video that has a being called Skinny Bob. If you can find Skinny Bob on a YouTube search, that entity, whatever that thing is, I don't know if it's CGI or what, it's been around for, 15, 20 years or something, predates CGI or predates the digital age. But that very much looks like what we saw. And while we're watching, another light kicks on from underneath this thing. And it's about 30 feet in diameter. It's about as wide, about as broad as this thing is tall off the floor of the meadow. And it's a cylinder of visible white light. And as soon as that kicks on, it gets the attention of all these little guys. And they're looking at it. And then they immediately start, not in a hurry, they immediately just start walking toward the light. And they're all paired up in 2s and 3s. They're not in a column or gang together or anything. And 2 of them would step into the light, and then they would pixelate out over the span of 20 seconds. A whole lot like the old Star Trek thing where they had the transporter or something. That was it. They would just pixelate out and be gone. And we watched, pairs and 3s step in, and same routine, 20 seconds or so, they're gone. And we watched the last 2 little guys step in there and disappear. And as soon as they were gone, that noise that we'd been hearing, which had kind of become the baseline now, we didn't really notice it anymore. But as soon as it shut off, we noticed the silence again. And that the column of light shut off, and the points of light on each point of the triangle changed colors from yellow and orange to just straight white. And the thing took off, and it didn't, blast off like a rocket ship. It lifted off like a hot air balloon and went up into the air. The higher it got, the faster it traveled. And we watched it from our tent until it was 3 points of light and then 1 point of light, and then it was gone. And it was still dead quiet. And we sat like 2 little scared 10-year-old kids, I swear to God, in that tent for probably half an hour. I voted that we stay in the tent until daylight because I didn't want to run from the tent to the car. I didn't want to be out in the open.
Right.
And to this day, I won't cut across an open field. I'll walk 1.5 miles around it rather than cut across it. So my friend convinced me that, let's just get out of here. And we did. And I took my wallet and my keys, nothing else. He took his wallet and his flashlight, and we made a run to the car, got in, and I'm like, Toby, can you navigate me out of here in the dark? Because there are no landmarks. It's just winding roads through trees, through forest. And he says, yeah, I got this. Well, he did have a good sense of direction. I mean, when we drove an ambulance, he was always the navigator. So I trusted him.
You left the tents there. You left the mattresses. You just
left the tent. We left everything. Like I told the OSI people when they were interrogating me, they said, well, it looks like you had a little campsite set up down there and you plan to return. And I said, no. I should back up. What we did was we were both hurt. I had like the worst sunburn I'd ever had in my life. I mean, everywhere on my body, under my arms, soles of my feet, I mean, everywhere, I'm burned. But I never peeled and I never blistered. We were the biggest threat to our health was dehydration. We were both severely dehydrated. And we both had flash burns to our eyes, is what the doctors called them. It's a sunburn to the cornea of your eye. It's the injury like an arc welder would get if he didn't wear that mask with a smoked mirror on it or smoke glass on it.
Right.
So and it's very painful. It feels like you have sand in your eyes. So it was a miserable 6-hour trip going back. But we both agreed, we knew that this was 1977. We were NCOs. We were in the U.S. Air Force on a nuclear base. If we went back and told them what we saw, I know what would have happened. I'm absolutely certain. They would have shipped us off for a psychological evaluation. They would have determined that we had a confabulation, hallucination, we were delusional or something, because, of course, those things don't exist. And we'd have been kicked out of the Air Force and probably on a medical discharge. It's not what I wanted. I was there to finish my enlistment and complete my education. I didn't, same with my friend Toby. He didn't want that either. So we agreed that we would tell them, because we were both ethical people too. I mean, and he's like, we can't lie. And I said, I don't think we have to lie. We can tell them the truth. We can tell them, we felt funny. We went to bed. We woke up sick as dogs and came home and didn't care about a $10 Kmart tent. We just wanted to get home.
Because you had to come clean to them because of your injuries.
Yeah. And they're like, how did you get the injuries? Truthfully, I don't have a clue, doctor. And this was kind of awkward too, because we were both members of the medical squadron, and we knew the doctors and nurses. We knew everybody. And, medical people take care of their own, and we were well cared for. But what they did was they broke us up. They put us in 2 different treatment rooms, and the hospital commander, the base commander, and 2 guys in civilian clothes I didn't know came into the treatment room as they were winding down my examination. And the hospital commander was very formal, and he came over to me and he said, Sergeant Lovelace, you're to have no contact with Sergeant Tobias in no way, shape, or form. That means not verbally, not by telephone. You're not to give him anything. He's not to give you anything. You're not to try to contact him through any third parties or pass notes to him, and on and on and on and on. And he said, and Sergeant, if you disobey my order, there'll be consequences. Do you understand me? And I said, yes, sir, I do. Because, I understood consequences, but I didn't really understand the reason why.
Sure.
But I'll tell you what was weird is that, like, this has happened to a lot of people from these emails I get from people. They tell me that, a group of friends will see something and then they'll all drift away for some reason. It's like the band breaks up.
For sure.
Ray Fowler's book, great book, The Allagash Four, has the same thing. These 4 guys fish together, hunt together, drink together, run around and enjoy one another's company. And after this Allagash event where they were abducted, they all went their separate ways. Even the twins were.
I would assume that it's not unlike a couple losing a child, and they maybe still love one another, but they can't handle being reminded constantly or something like that. Couples divorce a lot after they lose children because they can't
That's true.
cope with the reminder.
The tragedy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was weird on the drive back the whole way. Here this guy just, 12 hours earlier was my best friend. Our wives were friends. On our days off, we'd get together a lot of times, play cards, barbecue, do whatever. We were friends. And I suddenly felt like I didn't want anything to do with the guy. And I'm not like that. I'm a loyal friend. And I couldn't reconcile that emotion. I don't know where that came from. So when they gave me this no contact order, trauma. Yeah, I think we had a lot of trauma. So you'd ask about, how did I know that we'd been taken? And I said that I had some memories from being inside the ship, and I'll tell you what those are if you'd like.
Absolutely.
Please.
The first memory, they're kind of in a sequence. I've never had a clear linear memory of what happened here. It's just flashes, just bits and pieces. I called them intrusive thoughts. I'd be, cooking breakfast or cutting the grass, and I'd get these flashes, images in my mind. And then my heart rate would go through the roof. And I was tested for PTSD in 1980s, in the 80s, 86, I believe, and then again in the 90s, and tested positive for PTSD. Etiology unknown, because I didn't tell them. I saw a spaceship the size of a medical building. Um, so what I remember from being inside the ship is this. I was standing with my clothing folded in my arms like this, and I was frozen. I could not move a muscle. The only thing I could do was move my eyes. I could roll my eyes, but I couldn't tilt my head or turn my head. And I could perceive my friend was next to me. Although I really couldn't see him, somehow I knew he was there. And we were inside this massive ship, and it looked bigger on the inside than it looked like from the outside. And I don't get that. We were standing in some big open atrium, and there were multiple levels that went up. And unfortunately, I couldn't tilt my head back to see how far it went up. But I could tell that, man, it was a long way to the other side. And we saw the little gray guys running around. And I have a theory about them. And I'm sure there's more than one species of gray, because I've had people tell me, "Oh no, you're all wrong. They're this, they're that," you know.
Lots
but
of
I can
people
tell
think
you,
they know stuff.
absolutely, you know, and they're wrong, you know. I'm sure what they saw is what they saw and what they experienced. I don't take that away from them.
Oh, I don't either. It's just it's when people have too many answers, I automatically think they're a little dubious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my opinion of the grays, at least the ones we saw, was that they're not living and sentient in the way that we are. You know, they're not self-determinate thinking beings. I think they're like, in the book, I think I describe them as worker bees.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Like they're hive-minded or like they're robots? Because some people have speculated that they're not even alive, that they're purely generated like we would send a probe out.
Well, you know what? I think it's a combination of the two. Really, I think that they are, like I say, I don't think they have souls or are living and sentient the way you and I are, but I think that they're probably a combination of artificial intelligence and quantum computing and who knows, but with some biological material.
Right, yeah, okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
And they probably have a limited amount of self-determination,
Mm-hmm.
Just enough for them to get by.
It's interesting because I know in some like fairy myths, there's this idea of like, you know, sort of two tiers of fairies. Your normal ones that are like sort of basically children, and you're like fairy royalty essentially, which is more like a human being, you know, sort of taller and, you know, regal kind of thing. I can't remember where I heard that, so don't, you know, take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But
That's fairies.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels with there's a lot of books written about parallels of fairy myth and UFO encounters.
I never know. I'm going to look into that. I'm going to Dublin in September, so
yeah, well,
I'll let you know.
Yeah. There's been a lot of we've had a couple of guests on that have talked about it. It's interesting.
That's cool. I'll go back and look at those. I was looking through I was paging through your library. Had some interesting people. So back to what I was saying. I could see the other side of this thing was very far away, and the inside of the place was brightly lit. It was mostly gray and white, like porcelain kind of white. And the light inside of it was just incredible. It was just insanely lit. And I think that's what caused our burns and the damage to our eyes. Because it was hard. We were squinting. It was hard to take the light. And while I'm watching these gray guys in front of me, there was a being about 6 foot tall, about my height, walked directly in front of us and crossed our path, headed to my left. And I'm straining my eyes to the left to see him. And he was not gray. He was a chalkish pink color. And he had no discernible ears, just a bump maybe, a bump for a nose, a slit for a mouth. And his eyes were big, but not exaggerated big. They were more like a pair of wraparound Ray-Bans, but they were jet gloss black. And I didn't see any hair, and it looked like he wore a V-neck garment of some kind, like a sweater or something. And he carried himself like somebody in authority. So I got my eyes on this guy as well as I can. And he turns his head and we locked eyes. I mean, just by chance, I think. And of all the things, well, of the few things that I saw, this was probably the most frightening thing that happened to me. And this is the thing that comes back to me in nightmares. The second we locked eyes, this guy was in my head. And I don't know how else to put it, but he was in my head. And he knew, and I knew, he knew me, he knew my wife, he knew my plans, my secrets, my, my family, everything. He knew. And it's like he just either reviewed it or took a copy. I think he took a copy. And all I got back from those eyes were just incredible. I felt so inadequate looking at this thing and looking at me. I felt inferior, mentally, physically, in all ways. It's very much like is when our kids were little, we had a bird dog, English setter. And she'd come over and put her head in my lap, and I'd pet her on top of the head, and she'd look up at me, and I'd look down at her, and her eyes would radiate loyalty and trust and love. And hopefully mine radiated the same thing back, but we each knew our respective roles. She knew that I was the alpha. And in this equation with the alien, I was definitely the dog. That's the best way I can put it.
Yeah, that's terrifying and disturbing.
Well, it's an epiphany to know that human beings aren't the top of the food chain. We're not the be all and end all. That was a big revelation.
It's terrifying when you use the word food chain, though, with it.
It really is.
Yeah.
Who knows? I don't know.
Right.
I'm glad we got out of there alive.
Yeah.
And
Over the years, there must have been multiple times that you wanted to share the story.
oh God, yes.
Because I think about my own life, and I've been 30 people up until now. So it's pretty amazing that the 30 people you've been since then, none of those different yous have been willing to tell the story up until now.
That's well said. I like that. I like that analogy because that's true. We change as we go through life.
Right.
But I knew, I knew when I got out of the Air Force, I wanted to be a trial lawyer. That was my goal. And I knew when I became a member of the legal community that I couldn't trust anyone. Someone might be my best friend today, and then, things happen, and suddenly you've got an enemy on your hands.
Right.
So the only person I shared it with was my wife. And we didn't talk about it very often because when we did talk about it, it would bring nightmares for me. And
Exactly.
so we kind of let it lay. I had no intention of ever telling anybody about this. And then I retired from the state of Vermont in January of 2012. And we moved to Dallas to be next to our kids and grandkids. And I had a pain in my right knee. And I get all my medical care from the VA. And I asked my wife, can you drive me to the ER? My leg hurts and I think I need to be seen. I hadn't heard it. I did fall when I tried to stand up, but that was because of the pain. I didn't get injured in the fall. So she took me to the ER and they x-rayed my leg. And she was kind of confused and said, have you ever suffered a shrapnel wound or anything? And I laughed and I said, no, I didn't. I never made it out of Missouri, And she took a bunch of, they ended up taking 24 shots of my leg. And she said, you have an anomaly on your x-ray. And I've asked a radiologist to come down and take a look at it. Now, from working in healthcare law, I knew that wasn't standard procedure. Standard procedure was you throw them in a big stack, they go up to a somebody looks at it and gives a conditional reading and says, yeah, it looks like this. And then the radiologist confirms it a week later when they read the x-ray. So it's unusual to have the guy come down in person. Right. And he did, and he seemed annoyed to come down, but he looked at my x-ray. And if you have my x-rays, they're both on terrylovelace.com. If you look at the x-ray above my knee, there's a square structure that's obviously manufactured. It's not natural to the human body with two wires attached to it. That was above my knee. And he said, well, you had to have been in some kind of accident. And he says, there's a scar on your leg because you can't get something this size, this deep into the fascia and tissue and it not leave a scar. There's going to be a scar there. And I said, no, doctor, I don't have a scar.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It is quite noticeable.
Yeah, so I took off my pants so he could examine my knee, and he was visibly upset.
Huh.
And I said, well, let me ask you, doctor, how often is it that you examine someone with a foreign object in their body and there not be a corresponding scar? And he said, never. He said, I've been a radiologist 23 years and I've never seen this. He said, I have no way to account for that thing getting into your body. And he said, there's more. He said, there's some bones in the lower part of your leg. And, like being the smart I am, I said, well, aren't I supposed to have bones in the lower part of my leg? And, he pops this up on the view box, and in my calf muscle, there's a floret pattern of little things like Tic Tacs almost. And I recognize them immediately as not being, the tibia, the fibula, or, any of the normal bones that go in the lower leg. And I said, what are those? And he says, I don't have a clue. He said, I can tell from the x-ray film that they're the consistency of bone tissue. But he said, I've never seen bone tissue sprout in the middle of a muscle.
Yeah, it's like a flower. Almost looks like a flower.
Yeah, it's a floret pattern.
Yeah.
And he said, and I've never seen multiple pieces of bone sprout in the middle of a muscle and then arrange themselves in a symmetrical pattern. He said, I have no clue what this is. So, but that was a real moving event for me. That, I can't say I'd come to terms with it, but I was determined to live with it. And, but this validated that they put their hands on me. And
so when you initially went in, when they said, hey, we're going to bring down the guy to look at the scan, did you immediately go, this must be that?
No, I had no clue. I had no clue I had anything in my leg. The only clue that I had was the thing above my knee. On that, there's a spot there about 2 inches above my knee and to the right. That's where it lay. And I was a runner. I started running in 79 when I got out of the military because I ate too much, and I wanted to watch my weight. I got a cardiac history, so I got to watch my weight. And when I would run, beginning in 1979, when I started running, every time I would hit the 2-mile mark in my run, there was a spot above my knee and to the right that would go completely numb. And I mean, it felt like just like a shot of Novocaine in your mouth, numb and kind of itchy. And I took a safety pin with me one day, and at the end of my run, it would fade after about 30 minutes. So at the end of my run, I took my safety pin and I started tapping it out, and I could delineate the edges of the thing, and it was a perfect circle. And it was dead numb. I mean, there was no sensation whatsoever. So I thought, man, that's odd. And I went and I talked to my doctor about it. I said, I got the spot on my knee that goes numb when I run. And she said something like, it's a histamic reaction or something. Does it interfere with your run? Well, right. No, not really. And
typical doctor answer.
Well, then I wouldn't worry about it. So I didn't worry about it. But, in October of 2012, when I saw that x-ray, I got worried.
Right.
Because I connected the two together. How
long were you in the military?
6 years, 73 to 79.
So there you are on base. You didn't go too far. I mean, it was a good day's drive, but, you didn't go too far.
No.
During those years in the military, did you ever hear talk that would make you think that there was something going on?
In whispers, we did. And I'll tell you who I got it from. It was mostly from security policemen. Robert Hastings wrote the famous book, UFOs and Nukes, rather. Mm-hmm. And we started talking when I published my book. And we're kind of friends now. We talk about once a week. And he's interviewed probably 3,000 enlisted men and officers from military bases that were nuclear. And he's heard the same story that I heard before. Now, I didn't witness this. This is hearsay. But I heard it from a number of security policemen who were on guard at the bunker where they kept the nukes. And what the sighting was they would see a ring of orange light fly over the thing, hover, and shoot a laser beam down into the bunker. And do that for a couple of seconds, then laser beam turns off, then the ring of orange glowing light shoots off 0 to 500 miles an hour and is gone. So that's the rumor that we heard. And I believe them. I believe they saw that.
Yeah, well, I mean, why wouldn't you at this point? Given your experience.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't think we've ever had an experiencer on here tell us a story in such detail. That is absolutely amazing, and I'm glad you came. I had one question about it. So you said 2 years later, or no, 5 months later, Close Encounters came out.
Yeah.
When you saw that movie,
too.
were you like, "Oh crap, this is it"? They know, Were you
The movie was upsetting to me.
triggered?
But
I bet. Yeah.
I see these stories of like people who like went to see Saving Private Ryan and had some sort of trauma response because they were at the landing. Did you have a trauma response when you saw it? You're all like, "Oh crap, I can't."
You know what I did? And it was that scene where they opened the ramp. They had the ramp down, and I mean the tension was building throughout the movie. But the scene where they put the ramp down, and you saw the aliens in that fog, that really was upsetting to me.
And plus, it's a Devil's Tower. I mean, the name of the place is in the thing, kind of.
I made that connection too. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I know.
So what? I stayed away. I've never been a science fiction fan. I've never, my wife watched Star Trek. She was kind of into that, but not me. I read nonfiction, prefer nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was so reluctant to see anything like that because I knew it'd give me a nightmare. I didn't see Independence Day till 2015 or something.
Oh, yeah. Well,
so
I don't blame you. All right. Well, you have an upcoming speaking event. It's something that we already covered that I'm a little bit jealous of. Is this Contact in the Desert, right?
It is. It'll be my third time there, but we're virtual this year.
Right.
So, but I think the way they got it set up is going to be real unique because you can have a little avatar. You can kind of motivate around the rooms.
Oh, really?
And listen. Yeah, it's real cool. Listen to different speakers.
Cool. Yeah.
So, yeah, I'd encourage everyone to come June 25th through 28th. I'll be there. I'm going to tell my story. And if you've heard my story, I'm going to tell parts of it. I guarantee you've never heard before from my second book, Devil's Den, The Reckoning, which came out in December of 2020.
All right. Well, where's the best place for somebody to get their hands on the book?
Amazon.
Amazon.
They're not grouped together. You have to look for them separately. The first one is Incident at Devil's Den. It's got 570 reviews or something, 4.7 out of 5. I'm very happy for that. Yeah. And it was a #1 bestseller on Amazon. And then The Reckoning, Devil's Den, The Reckoning is the second book that came out third week in December of 2020. That hit #1 status in February. And I think that's a really good read. It's got updates on things about what happened to my friend Toby. And
yeah, I was curious about that.
What I did was I told you I got all these emails from people, and I took 30 of the very best stories, the best of the best, and I stuck them in the back of the book with their permission. And there's some cool stories back there.
Awesome. Well, Terry, I really appreciate you coming on the show. This has been really exciting. This is one of those few shows where Kara and I really didn't say much. We just sat back and listened because we were so enthralled with this story.
My mind has just been reeling the entire time.
Yeah. So I appreciate you coming on. I'd love to have you on again. And
sure.
What's the best place for somebody to follow you and get more information if they're interested?
I've got a website that's really not very well maintained, terrylovelace.com. And you can look me up on Facebook, or you can just email me at terrylovelace@yahoo.com. On my personal email, I return everybody's email. So,
well, thank you. Thank you very much for being on.
You're welcome. Thanks, Chauncey. Thanks, Kara. I appreciate you guys so much.
Welcome to the